The Paris rampage has raised concerns about future terror attacks and how to stop them. A new documentary takes an inside look at how the United States combats terrorism through the eyes of 12 CIA directors.
It's called Spymasters, CIA in the crosshairs. In this excerpt, intelligence experts say there were warning signs before September 11th.
Cofer Black, a legendary operative, had escaped an assassination attempt by al-Qaeda while serving in Khartoum.
The first week that I was in the counterterrorism center, a new chief comes in and they stick you in a conference room and all the people start coming in and briefing you on their areas of activity. I don't shock easy, but I was shocked. This was a wave of threats coming at the United States.
In the spring of 2001, we submitted authorities to the incoming Bush administration and essentially advocating a paramilitary operation. And the word back was, we're not quite ready to consider this. We don't want the clock to start ticking.
The crisis comes to a head on July 10, 2001. Richard Blee, the head of the bin Laden unit, barges into Cofer Black's office.
He comes in and he goes, okay, roof's falling in. I said, great, what you got? The information that we had now compiled was absolutely compelling. It was multiple sourced. It was sort of the last straw. We decided the next thing to do was to pick up the white phone, call the White House, we're coming down right now.
I said, Condi, I have to come see you. It was one of the rare times in my 7 years as director where I said, I have to come see you. We're coming right now.
Present at the July 10 White House meeting are National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and other top officials.
So Rich started by saying, there will be significant terrorist attacks against the United States in the coming weeks or months. The attacks will be spectacular. They may be multiple. Al-Qaeda's intention is the destruction of the United States.
I said, this country's got to go on a war footing now. I sort of slammed my hand on the table.
What happened?
Yeah, what did happen? Yeah, what happened?
Essentially, nothing happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Condoleezza Rice would later write, having raised the alert levels for U.S. personnel abroad, I thought we were doing what needed to be done.
If on the 10th of September we'd been able to walk into the President of the United States and say, we think U.S. airliners are going to be hijacked tomorrow. Just think about it. If we had been able to give him that very specific piece, as the president, he may very well have held all the airliners from flying. Until when?
If you don't put a system of defense in place, if you don't button up your airports, button up your buildings, change your visa policies, have some knowledge about what's going on in the United States, you're going to get hurt.
And we're joined by the executive producers of the Spymasters, Jules Naudet and Chris Whipple. It's absolutely riveting to watch. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So let's talk about that urgent meeting that took place in July of 2001. Chris, why wasn't action taken?
Well, George Tenet, just for the record, feels that those warnings were not ignored. He felt that it may very well have been too late to have prevented an attack at that point, and that the only way to really have prevented 9/11 would have been a massive effort to, as he put it, button up your airports, button up buildings, change your visa policies. He calls it a swivel from foreign to domestic. And that, until 9/11, there wasn't the political will for that to happen. In fact, he also says that even if the Bush White House had approved their plan to go into Afghanistan with a paramilitary operation, that it might well have been too late, even in the spring of 2001, that the plot was that far advanced. So having said that, I think viewers can look at this, they can see the warnings, they can see Cofer Black saying we need to go on a war footing now, and they can judge for themselves whether the Bush White House responded appropriately.
I know, because that was going to be my question, Julie, because you hear George Tenet, and I hear what you're saying, Chris, that he doesn't necessarily think the warnings were ignored. However, when you hear Cofer Black say the country needed to go on a war footing, that is, at that time, that was sort of an unthinkable idea for the United States to shift into that mode. That would have been dramatic. It seems to me, it sounds almost like Cofer Black thinks something could have been done to prevent the attacks.
I think it's clear. Cofer definitely thinks that, and I think he's very strong in his comment on it. But I'm reminded of what Mike Morell says later in the documentary, that it's not necessarily an intelligence failure, 9/11, but a national failure, and that it would take 9/11 to be able to have the country go on this path and be able to take these measures that were, frankly, impossible to take before. No one was ready for it.
It was just almost impossible to comprehend, basically, that terrorists could take planes and fly them into the Twin Towers. Is that the feeling?
Yep, except that some, it was often called a failure of imagination. The 9/11 Commission called it that. But Morell and others say, no, we did imagine that. There was there was a Pacific plot, for example, to fly airplanes into buildings. Morell says this was more of a national failure, as Jules was saying, rather than a failure of imagination. It was a failure to take all of the steps that would have been required to prevent 9/11, which is not to say that they saw it coming, that they knew about the airplanes, but as Jules says, it would have required a massive effort to prevent.
Julie, you recorded the video of the first plane hitting the tower on 9/11. What was that like to sit down with these CIA directors and go through this process of making the documentary?
Well, it was a little bit surreal for me because, as you know, my brother and I did on September 11th were right there. I filmed the first plane. I went in the towers themselves, and so to see that perspective from knowing more about how they planned it, and then the directors themselves discovering on that day and what was happening is a very, very surreal experience. But at the same time, I think a little bit cathartic for me to be able to understand more what happened. But I think that's what we love about doing programs like this is getting these people to talk about things they normally don't talk about and being candid. I think everyone has a tendency to see the CIA in a very, I think as General Hayden, who's on not too long ago, was saying, the American public is very bipolar when it comes to the CIA. We're either seen as Jack Bauer or Jack the Ripper. And I think there is a middle ground here that we don't normally think about and they don't talk about that we see for the first time in this program.
Before we let you go, Chris, after talking to all these CIA directors, do they feel that enough has changed over the course of the years to prevent another 9/11?
One of the really haunting and memorable comments that was made during the documentary was Mike Hayden, who said essentially that no matter what we do, all the CIA can really do is create time and space. And you can't solve the problem, which is the creation of terrorists in the first place. And all they can do is create space and time. And if the politicians and the leaders don't have the courage and the imagination to step up and confront the deeper problem, the underlying problem of terrorism, then as Hayden put it, you get into this cycle where you just end up killing people forever. All of the directors said memorably that we can't kill our way out of this, and that was really striking.
Powerful.
Jules Naudet and Chris Whipple, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Spymasters, CIA in the Crosshairs, premieres Saturday, November 28th on Showtime, which is a division of CBS.